Hello, everyone. So I am joined today by Lucy Shirley to talk about her piece Prelude, Rock Sparkle Because They Break the Light for piano and live electronics, which is being featured on the recital that I'm currently doing, or the recital series rather, which is piano and the post-pandemic Altered Bodies as kind of the title for it. So this is Lucy Shirley. Hello, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing great. It's so nice to speak with you.
Yeah, perfect. So this is just a great opportunity to learn more about the composer and learn more about the composition and just talk about the ins and outs of not only doing this kind of project, but also working with people in developing kind of a repertoire for piano and live electronics. There are a lot of pieces out there, but not a lot of composers that I can immediately think of that are able to put their kind of spin in the space, because I think that piano is at its heart a very classical instrument. And so you have a lot of people wanting to play Liszt and Bach and Beethoven when we can really get into sort of the nitty gritty with a lot of these really cool arts projects that incorporate other elements besides just piano. So I wanted to ask, because this is about the piano and the post-pandemic, if you could talk a little bit about your process. How did you deal with continuing art and composition and making music during the pandemic?
That's a great question. I feel like honestly, when the pandemic first happened, I was just graduating college. I was kind of at a crossroads in my life, and I really seriously considered taking a year off, just kind of like doing something not musical, because I thought so much of kind of what we do is about being in rooms together, interacting with each other, sharing with other people. And so I wasn't really sure how the landscape was going to look when we weren't able to do that. But I talked with one of my really dear professors from undergrad, and she just said, "No, just keep doing it. Like keep going ahead." I was kind of on track to go to my master's in Kansas City, and I was like really nervous. How is that going to go when so much of the class work is not going to be able to happen in person? And Sharon Parr was my piano professor, and she really was just like, everybody's going through it. You're going to find creative solutions for how to work around this, and just go ahead and like take a risk, move there, and like and keep making music. And I'm honestly so glad I did. I feel like it was such a strange year in a way that I think everybody had to figure out how are we going to use technology in tandem with music to kind of make collaboration possible when you literally can't physically be together. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's
and
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really, great about this, or at least a good thing that kind of came out of the pandemic, was there was this almost renewed sense of unity, which is composers and musicians were like, we will make music at all costs. And a lot of people were doing these kind of like virtual choirs and virtual wind ensembles. And people got very, very good at technology during the pandemic. And it's so funny. And now I think like Zoom is such a secondary process for all of us. It's almost become autonomic at this point. We're just like, oh yeah, all right, make the Zoom link, set it up, send it, boom, we're good, we're ready to go. It's a classroom environment.
I absolutely agree. Even I was looking at like the Zoom option for like different audio settings. And some of those are like specifically geared toward musicians because so many people are using Zoom as a way to collaborate across the country in a musical way.
Yeah, and I what I think that is so neat is that Zoom definitely kind of picked it up, because
Yes.
initially we didn't have any of those settings. And I think that there was a really interesting kind of change in the way that musicians worked over Zoom from, the early days of Zoom to now, where like in early Zoom years, it was almost like, all right, we're going to do like mass improvisation. And so it's going to be a lot of like aleatoric, amorphic music that didn't have to be so precisely timed. And we've sort of slowly developed a really good technology that allows us actually to kind of play in synchronous with each other through this virtual medium. So that's, I think, a really nice boost to the technology also, because it allows for so many more opportunities now that the pandemic's over, but we can still work globally.
Absolutely. It's like Zoom heard us and they kind of like incorporated that option for musicians specifically.
So with that being in mind and the idea of technology and moving forward, I want to ask you, what was your approach with the electronics of this piece, and how was it a part of the compositional process?
Yes. So honestly, I'm kind of a newbie when it comes to making electronic music. Most of my undergrad and masters was specifically focused on just like acoustic chamber ensemble. So I was really excited to kind of delve deeper into Max, the program I used for the piece. Um, so previously, over the summer, I had like my first premiere with live electronic processing. So I was kind of able to have a foundation of what I was looking for, but there were still parts of the electronics that I had no idea what I was doing. I knew the sound I wanted, but it was kind of, okay, how do I use this toolbox to help me create this type of sound? So I did what I always do, and I went into like the help file and I really researched deeply about how to do granular synthesis. And then I kind of did a patchwork altogether. And then by the time I kind of came back to school, I talked with my professor here, JFC, and he was kind of able to give me some feedback about ways to make it better. Um, yeah, so I think in a way it was a huge learning process for me, and it was a really nice opportunity to hone my Max skills a little bit more. And it's also really nice knowing that you have such a strong background in Max that if I did anything that was maybe not super clear in the patch, that you were super comfortable with it and would be able to work around it. So it was kind of nice for me to know as a composer.
Yeah, and I always think it's really interesting when working with live electronics as opposed to a fixed process, right? Because my initial study in electronic music was actually doing a lot of fixed media with piano. And my introduction to that was during my undergrad, where I was a piano major rather than a composer. And I was playing Jacob TV's Body of Your Dreams, which is this kind of like post minimalist work that is using exercise commercials, and it chops them up, and then it has like really strict timing, so it's this really cool experience, but it's not responsive. It's actually a little bit stressful in the preparation because you as the pianist have to be so on time, because if you go off tempo at all, you're like totally lost. And with fixed media
Nightmare.
pieces, you're like, I think that there's a lot of stress that's engaged with it. With
Oh,
live electronics like this, I've found that it's a lot easier to kind of sink into the sound when you know that it's going to respond to you. It allows for a lot more space, and that's, I think, one of the things that I've liked in just practicing your piece so far is in the use of almost this like pointillistic soundscape and these like really delicate tones. You have a lot of space to just kind of listen to the piece as it works with the electronics. And actually, that's why I really like delay effects in general and kind of these overlapping delays and granularization, so that you can almost break down to the core of the sound what you want, but you're not having to stress over moving through the piece. You can more closely focus on, getting the notes and experiencing the piece as a performer with the audience rather than being so detached. And that's why I like live electronics. I think it's a way to like further attach the performer to the ensemble.
I absolutely agree. And I know that this is kind of something that might be seen as a problem with live electronics, but I like it in the fact that like let's say something happens in the moment or something that you aren't expecting to get recorded gets recorded. That's just how it is. I think that's kind of magical that it's in the moment with you. It's not this fixed thing that isn't changeable. It's responding to you. And if you even change how you do something, it's going to respond in a different way. And I think that's nice to be in the moment with you.
Yeah, there's almost like this like Cajun philosophy of you just gotta accept what happens, and that's what happens. That's a live electronic process. And I think in that actually you get to something that's really unique and really organic, because these pieces will never be performed the same way twice. And even when you're doing like a recording of it, I feel like there's so much of an organic quality to the recordings of the piece. And it would be, I think, a disservice to not kind of repeat these pieces multiple times, almost in like the, the Boulez way, where every time you play, the aleatory is a little bit different. This, for me, really matches that same kind of quality where you have to play it multiple times to kind of get used to the different sounds and processes that can come out of it. And I've really enjoyed just kind of seeing what happens over the course of multiple sessions in live electronic work, because you're like, well, it didn't work that well that time. So I wonder if I'm starting to recognize that there's something in my playing, I can also kind of change things a little bit to almost reshape the organism. It's like if lightning struck in a different way, would we have evolved the same? You get to
Yeah.
kind of do that with the piece, and each of the kind of like sparkly pointillistic moments in your composition almost serve as like those little lightning bolts that like create new kinds of possibilities for each time that it's played.
Yes. And capturing them in a different moment or at a millisecond later is going to completely alter the everything you're hearing for like the next minute, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So that being said, right, we've talked about these like the sparkling quality of the pointillistic. So I want to talk to you about the title of your piece. Could you tell me what was the inspiration behind the use of the title as being Prelude, but then also including your subtitle Rocks Sparkle Because They Break the Light?
Yes. So honestly, Rock Sparkle Because They Break the Light was the original title. That was kind of my whole aesthetic idea for the piece. It came from me reading an article about the way kind of precious stones interact with light and the way that like impurities and kind of like things wrong with these stones are what we see as sparkling and beauty. And I thought that was a very interesting like metaphor. Take it however you will. Um, but then as I was writing the piece, I don't know if you're familiar with Ruth Crawford Seeger's Preludes. Yes, they're some of my favorite, and you can see some similarities in the way I use like the pedal and the way that I'm using like some different pointillistic features. So her preludes were such an inspiration to me that I also felt like I kind of want to title this as a prelude. It feels like a prelude. It doesn't really feel like a finished, a fine, or more of like a final work. It feels like this could be a series. It could maybe come before something else. But then I didn't really want to say like Prelude One because, well, have I written other preludes? I mean, probably. Then I like go back and retitle other piano works? I don't think so. So I decided to combine both, kind of almost like a la Mendelssohn Songs Without Words, giving a subtitle as well. Even though he didn't necessarily give those subtitles, I think there is a little bit of a precedent. So it's kind of best of both worlds that you could refer to it as just the prelude, or you can be more specific and rock sparkle because they break the light, and that's the whole aesthetic quality of what I'm going for.
Yeah, it's kind of Debussying in the way,
Yeah,
right? Cathedral
yeah,
Anglaise or the Sunken Cathedral or Falling Leaves, all of these different kind of ways to describe the pieces. And I actually really like, I think, the philosophy behind a lot of printing editions, which is we're so saturated with like the names, like we know what the titles are called, but my introduction was with an edition where the names of the actual preludes were printed at the back of each. So at the end of each piece, so you didn't actually learn the title until you'd finished going through the piece for the first time, which I think was a neat way of kind of separating your vision for the piece from the programmatic, because so many times programmatic titles can help to kind of direct the listener's ear, and sometimes you want to avoid that direction. With the use of prelude, was there any intentions of like box style prelude form?
So actually, no, it was more, I felt programmatically this is kind of opening for something that comes later in your program. So I'm not sure. I think it could even be a series of preludes. I didn't really think of a formal structure as a prelude. It was almost more, this is coming before something else. And I don't know what that something else is. I just felt like this wasn't finished. You get to the end of the piece, and I don't think that's the end of any sort of concert, at least for me.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that with this, like you have a very clear use of form. It's a three-part form.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a large ternary. And I think when we hear these kinds of shapes just naturally in music, it's really easy to kind of define the arch quality, which is indicative to me of so many preludes of kind of introducing an idea, elaborating it on a little bit, but ultimately coming back cyclically to where we started, which is so different than, say, like a piece by Liszt, where your program very clearly moves from state one to state two being the end of the piece, and there's a really clear direction in that. And by using this like three-part arch form, it very nicely rounds the piece off, almost in a way where you could imagine it doing a full circle, and then it leads into whatever the next piece is, which is a different idea but still within the same live electronic usage. It really helps to prime the ear for the audience of what's going to come next. So
I agree. And in all honesty, a lot of my pieces fit with that ternary form. I love the idea of kind of shaping the piece so that a change happens, or maybe it's kind of like the hero's journey. You come out different. But so often, I think my own works happen in a single moment. It's like this entire piece is just a self realization, and you're the same as you were before, but you still have this kind of like newfound realization that's come in the middle. And so I guess I didn't really think of a prelude form beforehand, but thinking about it, yeah, I think a lot of my works conform to that.
nice. So can you talk about then, this idea of self-realization, what the middle kind of represents for you? To me, your opening and your closing really relate super cleanly back to the title. Like there's no lack of clarity for me, just in the way that you have these pointillistic moments. As I mentioned before, they really sparkle. In the middle section, you get this very chorale, almost like jazz like sound with these almost interruptions in the really high registers of these tones. How does that section work for you programmatically, or how does it relate back to your intention with the title?
That's a great question. So I was thinking a lot about kind of the cultural um, ideas around like engagement and like precious stones, and kind of like what you're looking for in love, and how these stones can represent a whole love relationship. And there's so much pressure around it, and so much like in media and commercials all about like these precious jewels. And so in a way, this middle section was kind of representing to me a romance, a relationship, like what you're hoping for in a stone, what maybe like anxieties about it, this kind of weird cult of precious gems, and what they represent interpersonally, as well as just like being pretty to look at. They're also kind of like a token of a relationship. And I was kind of I don't know, like tossing that idea around and struggling with it, going like, jewels are beautiful, but like what, they're more than just a beautiful stone. It can also be a signifier of meaning in a relationship. So yeah.
I really like that interpretation actually too, because it kind of leads to something that happens in the last section of the piece. So your opening section, it's really based on kind of one note. Every note is played as an individual, but at the very end of the piece, it goes back to that kind of pointillistic quality, except for on the very last line where you have polyphony for the first time. You have, kind of a homophonic texture in the middle, which is very chorale like, but you have voices moving in tandem in this kind of contrary motion towards each other at the very end, that last line. So that really matches with what your kind of idea of the relationship and the coming together. So that's a neat way to kind of uh, infuse programmatic quality into very explicit counterpoint, actually.
Yes, and it was really important for me that the hands played separately. So the left hand is one voice, the right hand is one voice. And that, yeah, you are moving together. And then at the very end, you break apart again.
Hmm. Yeah.
So not to be cheesy and so explicit about it, but it is that kind of idea of fracturing, just like the light fractures when it sparkles on a rock. You also like your relationships can fracture, and so I think there's a lot of meaning inherent within.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. It's such a great piece. I'm so thankful to you for writing it, and I hope that everyone who listens or finds this little interview with Shirley will go with Lucy Shirley will go check out all of her other works, see what she has to offer. It's a lot of really great and lovely pieces, and I'm excited for our next collaboration too. So thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Matt, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to work with you. You're a fabulous pianist, composer, and I'm just so lucky that you asked me to be a part of this project. I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, thanks so much.